I had just closed a $500 million deal, the moment I thought would define my entire career, when my boss shut the conference room door, looked me dead in the eye and said, $120,000. That's my cut. I laughed at first. I thought he was joking. But then he leaned closer, placed his hand on the very files I had built over 8 months of work, and whispered something that made my blood run cold. Either you pay, or tomorrow you'll be the one accused of stealing everything. The scariest part wasn't the threat. It was the fact that he had enough power to make everyone believe it. I froze in the glass-walled conference room, Victor Hale's words still echoing in my head like a gunshot that hadn't finished firing. $120,000, or my career. My name is Maya Carter, 32 years old, senior financial analyst at Northbridge Capital, one of the most aggressive investment firms in New York. People at the firm say I have a quiet mind for numbers, but the truth is, I've spent the last 3 years surviving in silence, letting others speak louder while I built results they later claimed as their own. Across the table sat Victor Hale, my direct boss. Victor is a man in his early 40s, tall, sharply built, always dressed like he's stepping out of a magazine cover. Tailored charcoal suits, silver cufflinks, and a watch that costs more than my yearly salary. His face is clean-shaven, his jaw always tense like he's permanently holding back impatience. But it's his eyes that unsettle people, cold, calculating, and patient in a way that feels rehearsed. Rumour inside Northbridge is that Victor rebuilt his entire career after being pushed out of a previous firm for ethical restructuring issues. No one ever confirmed what that meant. No one dared to ask twice. Standing silently near the glass wall was Liam Brooks, my closest colleague. Liam is 29, slightly tall but lean, with messy brown hair he never fully combs, and sleeves always rolled up like he's ready to fix something at any moment. He has a habit of tapping his pen twice before speaking, as if measuring honesty before releasing words. Unlike most people here, Liam doesn't pretend. If he thinks something is wrong, his expression gives him away instantly, and right now, he looked like he had just watched a system collapse. On the table between us lay the Medcore acquisition file, the biggest healthcare tech buyout Northbridge had ever attempted. $500 million. 8 months of modelling, risk analysis, negotiations, and late nights where I basically lived inside spreadsheets and boardroom calls. Medcore wasn't just a deal, it was my reputation. Victor leaned back slowly, as if we were discussing something trivial like lunch. "You don't need to make this complicated, Maya," he said calmly. "I made introductions. I opened doors. I allowed you into rooms you didn't belong in." That was the lie he always told. Soft, polished, believable enough for executives who never checked details. Liam shifted behind the glass, jaw tightening. I could tell he wanted to speak, but he didn't. Not yet. Victor tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "People remember who closes deals," he continued, "not who prepares them." My pulse hammered in my ears. I thought about my mother back in Boston, about the hospital bills stacking like unpaid debt, about every promotion I almost got but didn't. And then Victor smiled, not warmly, warningly. "Think carefully, Maya," he said, "because if I say you manipulated Medcore's financial projections, no one here will question it. They'll just replace you." For the first time, I realized this wasn't just extortion, it was control. And he had been practicing it for years. The celebration after the Medcore announcement didn't last beyond a single night. By morning, Northbridge Capital returned to its usual rhythm, phones ringing, monitors glowing, people pretending success was always inevitable. But for me, everything felt altered, like the building itself had shifted weight. At 9:12 a.m., I found Victor Hale waiting at my desk. He stood with his usual controlled posture, hands in his pockets, expression calm enough to be mistaken for professionalism. Victor always looked like a man who belonged everywhere and answered to no one. Today, however, There was something sharper behind his eyes. Anticipation. "Maya," he said smoothly, "we need to talk about compensation alignment." That phrase alone told me everything. Victor stepped closer. "You closed Medcore. Congratulations. But let's be honest, you and I both know deals like that don't happen without structure, without guidance." His voice softened, almost friendly, but his words tightened like a noose. Then he slid a folded note onto my desk. Inside was a number, $120,000. My stomach dropped. "This is your share," he continued casually, "for opening doors, guiding the process, introducing you to the right rooms." I stared at him. "You didn't guide anything. You showed up after negotiations were done." His smile didn't change, but his eyes cooled further. "Careful, Maya. People in your position sometimes forget how fragile perception is." Across the office, I noticed Emily Hart, a senior compliance officer in her late 30s. Emily was tall, slender, always dressed in monochrome suits that made her look like she had stepped out of a legal magazine. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her expression rarely shifted from neutral professionalism. But those who knew her said she used to be different, more outspoken, before she handled a case 3 years ago that nearly got her fired for challenging executive misconduct. Since then, she had learned to stay quiet, but her eyes still watched everything. Emily was watching now, not Victor, me. Later that afternoon, Liam Brooks approached my desk. He looked more dishevelled than usual, his shirt slightly wrinkled, sleeves pushed up, as if he had been working non-stop. There was urgency in his movements. "I found something," he whispered, glancing around before sliding a USB drive into my hand. "What is this?" I asked. "Internal email logs," he said quietly. "Victor's account. Someone's been editing financial summaries after submission. It's not just you." That sentence changed everything. Liam leaned closer. "There's more. A former legal analyst, David Rourke, he was terminated last week. Official reason was policy violation, but I checked. He flagged Victor's behaviour in compliance reports." I felt a chill. "And then what happened?" Liam hesitated. "He was gone within 48 hours. No explanation." That night, I reviewed the logs in my apartment. Lines of altered approvals, changed timestamps, deleted comments. Evidence of something systematic, not accidental. Victor wasn't just stealing credit, he was rewriting reality. At 2:13 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown number. A single message. "Stop digging. You're not the first." The message on my phone didn't fade from my mind, even as I stood in the hospital hallway, watching my mother breathe through a thin plastic tube. Her name is Linda Carter, 58 years old, once a high school literature teacher, sharp-witted, warm, and fiercely independent before her heart condition slowly stripped away her strength. Now she looked smaller, fragile in the white hospital bed, her grey-streaked hair tucked behind her ears, her voice reduced to tired whispers whenever she woke. I split my life into two worlds, the sterile silence of the hospital and the suffocating pressure of Northbridge Capital. At work, Victor Hale acted unchanged. Same tailored suits, same controlled smile, same casual dominance over everyone in the room. But now I noticed more. How conversations stopped when he entered. How people adjusted their tone unconsciously. One morning, I began documenting everything. Every meeting, every instruction, every suggestion that sounded more like an order. I used my personal recorder disguised as a pen, slipping it into meetings where Victor spoke freely, confident that no one would dare challenge him. During one of those late nights at the office, Liam Brooks pulled me aside into a quiet conference room. Liam was exhausted, dark circles under his eyes deeper than before, his usually messy brown hair now unkempt from stress. "I dug deeper," he said, placing a printed folder on the table. "Victor didn't start this here. Inside were records from Victor's previous company, Stonewell Investments, a mid-sized firm that collapsed after an internal restructuring scandal. Liam pointed at a name in the report. He was investigated for financial manipulation. Same pattern, but the case never went to trial. Why? I asked. Liam hesitated. Because the head of compliance at the time resigned suddenly. Everything was buried. That night, I met Sarah Mitchell in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the hospital. Sarah was a 22-year-old intern in the analytics department. She had soft features, pale skin, and anxious eyes that kept scanning the room like she expected someone to appear. Her blonde hair was tied back loosely, as if she didn't have the energy to care about appearance anymore. She spoke softly, carefully, like every word had been rehearsed in fear. "He doesn't yell," she said. "That's the worst part. He doesn't need to. He just makes you feel like you're already wrong." Sarah told me how Victor would isolate her during late-night tasks, criticize her work in front of others, then later send private messages suggesting personal dinners to discuss improvement. She refused. After that, her assignments disappeared. "I thought it was just me," she whispered, "until I heard what happened to David Rourke." Back at the hospital that night, I sat beside my mother's bed, holding her hand while my phone lit up again. A new message. "You're juggling too much. One of those lives will break first." I looked at my mother's fragile chest rising and falling, and I realized Victor wasn't just attacking my job. He was attacking everything I was trying to keep alive. The decision to confront Victor didn't come from courage. It came from exhaustion. After nights of watching my mother's heartbeat on hospital monitors and days of pretending I wasn't being slowly cornered at Northbridge Capital, I stopped feeling fear in the usual way. It was replaced by something colder. Calculation. At 4:47 p.m., I booked conference room 9B. Glass walls, no blinds, perfect visibility from the hallway. I chose it deliberately. Victor arrived at exactly 5 p.m. He stepped inside like he owned the room itself. Victor Hale, 43, immaculate in a dark navy suit that seemed tailored to silence objections before they were spoken. His silver cufflinks caught the light as he closed the door behind him with slow confidence. His expression carried the same practiced calm, but today I noticed something beneath it, a flicker of curiosity, like he already suspected I had stopped playing along. "You asked for this meeting," he said, lowering himself into the chair. "I hope you're ready to be reasonable." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed a folder on the table between us. Inside were printed emails, financial logs, time-stamped edits, and highlighted discrepancies tied directly to Medcor reporting. Victor glanced at it, then smiled faintly. "Cute. You've been busy." That was when I pressed play on my recorder. His voice filled the room. $120,000. That's my cut." The silence that followed was heavier than sound. Victor leaned back, studying me now with a different expression. Less arrogance, more interest. "You really think that matters?" he said quietly. "You're still one signature away from being erased from this company." My hands didn't shake. That surprised me most. "You forgot something," I said, sliding another document forward. "You don't control the full record." At that exact moment, Liam Brooks appeared outside the glass wall. He didn't enter, just held up his laptop so I could see the screen. Liam, late 20s, always slightly dishevelled with tired eyes that looked like they hadn't fully trusted sleep in months, gave me a small nod. He had managed to recover the revision history of Medcor files. Every alteration Victor made, every overwritten approval, every hidden edit time-stamped after my submissions. Inside the room, Victor's jaw tightened for the first time. Unbeknownst to him, Liam wasn't alone in this. Across town, Sarah Mitchell sat in a small legal aid office, her posture rigid, fingers twisting nervously around a pen. She wore a plain grey sweater, her blonde hair tied back more tightly than before, as if she was trying to contain herself. The attorney beside her, Marla Jensen, a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s with short black hair and a reputation for defending whistleblowers, gently pushed a statement form toward her. "You don't have to do this," Marla said. Sarah swallowed. "If I don't, he'll just keep doing it to someone else." Her signature on that document would matter later more than she knew. Back in the conference room, Victor stood slowly. His chair scraped the floor. "You've made a mistake, Maya," he said, voice low now, controlled, dangerous. "You're building something you won't be able to finish." I met his gaze. For the first time, I didn't look away. "I already finished it," I said. And then I opened the final file. The moment I opened the final file in conference room 9B, I expected silence, shock, maybe even panic from Victor. What I didn't expect was how quickly the system itself would turn against me instead. By morning, the atmosphere at Northbridge Capital had shifted. Not openly, not dramatically, but in the subtle ways only someone inside it could feel. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Slack messages I used to be included in suddenly went quiet. My name appeared less in emails, as if it was being slowly erased rather than confronted. At 9:30 a.m., I was summoned to Human Resources. The HR office was located on the 14th floor, designed to feel neutral: soft grey carpets, white walls, and too many plants trying to simulate calm. Behind the desk sat Harriet Collins, head of HR, a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly straight, platinum blonde hair, sharp reading glasses, and a voice that never rose above controlled professionalism. Harriet had worked at Northbridge for 18 years, surviving multiple leadership changes by mastering one skill: protecting the company, not the people in it. Beside her was Daniel Price, legal compliance advisor, a thin man in his late 30s with neatly combed dark hair and nervous hands that constantly adjusted his tie. He avoided eye contact more than he used it. "Maya Carter," Harriet began evenly, sliding a document across the table. "We need to discuss confidentiality obligations regarding internal disputes." I already knew what it was before reading it: a non-disclosure agreement. "Sign this," Daniel added softly, "and this situation can be handled internally, quietly, for everyone's benefit." "For everyone's benefit," I repeated. Harriet didn't react. Northbridge has a responsibility to protect its reputation. Public escalation would damage ongoing acquisitions and shareholder confidence. I looked at the paper. It wasn't protection, it was containment. Meanwhile, somewhere on the executive floor, tension was building in silence. Richard Langston, the CFO, a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, sharp cheekbones, and a reputation for treating numbers like weapons, had begun reviewing Victor's financial trail independently. Unlike others, Richard wasn't loyal to people, only to exposure risk. Years of crisis management had left him emotionally detached, but analytically ruthless. That afternoon, Liam Brooks was called into an emergency reassignment meeting. Liam stood in the hallway outside my desk for a moment before leaving. He looked exhausted, his usual messy hair now falling into his eyes, his posture slightly slumped, as if the weight of the company had physically shifted onto him. He didn't speak. He just slipped a small note into my hand. "They're moving me to data systems. I'm being silenced." He walked away before I could respond. Later, I found Richard Langston in the finance wing. He didn't acknowledge me immediately, only stared at a monitor filled with audit logs. Richard was tall, broad-shouldered, and always wore suits slightly too expensive for a man who claimed he didn't care about appearances. His voice was calm when he finally spoke. "You're either very brave," he said, "or very correct." I told him I was both. He exhaled slowly. Victor is a problem. But problems like Victor tend to come with collateral damage. Like me, I said. A pause. Yes, he admitted. Like you. The company wasn't defending Victor openly. It was doing something worse. It was preparing to isolate me so thoroughly that the truth wouldn't matter anymore. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the hospital bracelet of my mother still on my desk, as a reminder of what I was fighting to protect. My phone lit up again. Unknown number. One message. They will bury you before they bury me. But this time, I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't sure when exactly it changed, but the system had just made its mistake. It had chosen a side. The email arrived at 8:03 a.m. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative suspension pending internal review. No warning, no discussion, just deletion in corporate form. I stood in my apartment holding the phone, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less final. Outside, New York moved like nothing had changed. Inside Northbridge Capital, I had already ceased to exist. By noon, my access cards stopped working. My desk was cleared before I even arrived, and Victor Hale was still there. I didn't need to see him to know what was happening. By mid-afternoon, internal Slack channels began shifting tone. My name appeared in fragments, concerns, behavioral escalation, unauthorized interpretation of data. Carefully constructed language designed to make doubt sound like fact. Victor wasn't defending himself. He was rewriting me. At 2:40 p.m., I met Emily Whitaker in a quiet stairwell between floors. Emily was a senior internal auditor, mid-40s, tall and sharply built, with angular features and iron-grey streaks in her dark hair. She always wore structured black blazers that made her look like she belonged more in court than in an office. People said she used to be aggressive in investigations, until a past case involving executive retaliation nearly destroyed her career. Since then, she became precise, quiet, and terrifyingly observant. "You're becoming a risk narrative," she said, instead of greeting me. "That's corporate speak for liability," I replied. Her eyes flicked briefly to the hallway camera before returning to me. "Victor is accelerating influence control. You're not just being isolated, you're being positioned as the source of instability." That was confirmation, not warning. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell's world was collapsing in a quieter way. She met me that evening in the back of a small bookstore cafe, her posture tense, shoulders slightly hunched, as if she expected the walls to listen. Sarah looked paler than before, her blonde hair tied so tightly it emphasized the fear in her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she held her coffee. "He knows," she whispered. "Knows what?" "That I spoke to you." Her voice cracked. "HR called me in today. They said my internship status is under review. And then someone from immigration compliance asked about my visa extension." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Victor wasn't just attacking employees. He was dismantling their ability to exist in the system. Later that night, Liam Brooks called me from a prepaid number. His voice was low, urgent. I resigned. I closed my eyes. I couldn't stay in data systems. They're sanitizing everything I touch. There was a pause before he continued. But I copied everything first. A flash drive, dropped into my mailbox an hour later, contained years of audit trails, deleted communications, and mirrored server logs Victor didn't know had been backed up outside corporate infrastructure. "I don't want revenge," Liam said over the phone. "I want the truth to survive without me." That night, I sat alone with the drive in my hand, realizing something fundamental had changed. This was no longer about my job, or even Victor. It was about how easily truth could be buried when enough people agreed to look away. and I had just run out of people willing to look away with me. The decision to go outside Northbridge Capital felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing if there was ground below. I sent everything at 6:18 a.m. The flash drive data from Liam, my recorded meetings with Victor Hale, email logs, financial anomalies, and Sarah Mitchell's statement through her attorney, Marla Jensen, a sharp, mid-40s litigator known for representing whistleblowers in corporate retaliation cases. Marla was blunt, methodical, and emotionally unreadable, the kind of lawyer who didn't promise justice, only procedure. Within 48 hours, the SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. That's when the storm started. Northbridge didn't collapse, it reacted. First came silence from leadership, then controlled statements about cooperation, followed by sudden internal audits that felt less like investigations and more like damage containment. Victor, however, disappeared from internal visibility entirely. No emails, no meetings, no trace, just absence where influence used to be. But absence is never peace. It is preparation. I met Special Agent Howard Briggs and analyst Dana Keller in a federal building downtown. Briggs was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too many corporate cases end the same way. Dana was younger, early 30s, precise, with tightly pulled back hair and a voice that never wasted words. They treated everything I gave them like puzzle pieces already missing context, but forming something dangerous. "This is not isolated misconduct," Dana said after reviewing Liam's logs. "This is systemic manipulation of financial reporting structures." Briggs leaned back slowly. "We've seen versions of this before, but not with this level of internal cooperation." Outside the federal building, my phone buzzed non-stop. Unknown numbers, messages without names. "You're destroying yourself. Stop before it's too late. Victor is not your real problem." At the same time, something unexpected began happening. People started coming forward. Not just Sarah, not just Liam. A former analyst named Kevin Rhodes, late 30s, tall and heavy-set with a permanent frown from years of suppressed frustration, arrived at Marla's office with printed emails showing identical patterns of credit theft from 3 years prior. A former compliance assistant, Nina Patel, a quiet woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a habit of speaking only when necessary, provided documentation of complaints that had been lost internally after reaching Victor's department. Each story mirrored the last. Different years, same structure, same silence afterward. And then Liam reappeared. Not inside Northbridge, but outside it. He stood at a press-affiliated legal briefing arranged through Marla Jensen. He looked thinner, more exhausted, but his voice was steady when he spoke publicly for the first time. "I watched systems erase people," he said. "I refuse to let mine be next." That statement changed everything. The SEC escalated the case into a formal investigation. Northbridge's stock dipped for the first time in years. And Victor Hale resurfaced, not in person, but through legal counsel filings denying all allegations while simultaneously claiming I had fabricated coordinated narratives. But the most important shift wasn't institutional. It was personal. For the first time, I wasn't alone holding the evidence. I was standing inside a network of it. And networks don't break easily. They spread.
The morning Victor Hale was arrested, the city felt strangely normal. I remember standing at my apartment window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching news alerts flash across my phone. Federal agents execute warrant at Crawford-linked executive residence. His name wasn't even the headline yet, just a growing shadow being pulled into light. It didn't feel like victory at first. It felt like silence after a long, exhausting storm. Victor was taken in on charges that went far beyond what I initially exposed. Fraud, obstruction, and a pattern of financial coercion that stretched across multiple firms. The man who once controlled entire rooms was now reduced to a file being carried through federal systems. At Northbridge Capital, everything shifted overnight. Board members resigned quietly, their exits framed as strategic transitions. One of them was Harold Benson, a grey-haired man in his 60s with a polished smile that never reached his eyes, known internally for prioritizing profit over compliance. His departure was sudden, his statement carefully worded, but everyone understood what it meant. Change was being forced, not chosen. 2 weeks later, I was called into a board review meeting. The room felt different this time, less like a fortress, more like a reconstruction site. At the centre sat Eleanor Graves, the company's newly appointed interim chief ethics officer. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp silver hair cut into a precise bob, tall posture, and a calm voice shaped by years of legal defence work. People said she had once destroyed an entire corruption network at her previous firm before walking away voluntarily. Unlike others, she didn't avoid eye contact. She used it. "Maya Carter," she said, "your actions triggered a necessary restructuring of this institution." Across from her sat Jonathan Pierce, the new CEO appointed after the board purge. Jonathan was early 50s, lean with carefully styled salt and black hair and a habit of speaking like every sentence was pre-approved by legal counsel. He looked at me not with warmth, but assessment, like I was both asset and risk. "We are formally reinstating you," he said, along with a revised position. A folder slid toward me. Director of Strategic Integrity and Client Oversight. A title that didn't exist before me. I didn't answer immediately, because I noticed something in Eleanor's expression. Not celebration, not relief, but recognition. Like she had seen this pattern before, in another company, another person, another version of me. Outside the corporate restructuring, life continued to untangle itself. Liam Brooks returned, but not to data systems. He was reinstated under a new role. Senior Data Integrity Specialist. When I saw him again in the hallway, he looked healthier than before, though still carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone who had fought too long without sleep. He didn't smile widely, just nodded once, like a shared understanding had been restored. Sarah Mitchell received something I didn't expect, a full legal settlement package and an academic scholarship funded through a whistleblower protection initiative quietly supported by external legal donors. When I met her outside Marla Jensen's office, she looked lighter, not healed, but no longer trapped. "I thought speaking up would ruin everything," she said softly. "It didn't," I replied. "It just revealed what was already broken." Weeks later, I established something within Northbridge that no one had formally requested but everyone now accepted. The Whistleblower Protection and Integrity Program. It wasn't just policy, it was structure. Anonymous reporting channels, independent legal review, external audit partnerships. Protected escalation pathways that bypassed internal retaliation systems entirely. The same system that once tried to erase me was now being redesigned through my work. One evening, as I left the office, I received a final message. Unknown number, no threat this time, just one line. "You didn't win, you rebuilt." I deleted it without replying, because for the first time, I understood something Victor never did. Truth doesn't arrive as victory. It arrives as permanence, and it stays. So what would you do? Stay silent and protect your career, or speak up and risk everything to expose the truth? Have you ever chosen silence when you knew something was wrong? Or stood up and paid the price for it? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear your story. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories about truth, power, and survival.